I tried a lot of different ways of making stained glass windows this week. I think I finally found an approach that works for the Victorian poor law offices I am building for behind my viaduct. They look superb as they are, but as an added bonus, they also look spectacular when lit from within. Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael, and in this video I will share the steps I went through to make these realistic stained glass windows. From the outside, stained glass is very dark and appears to be largely just one colour. Other than these blue and green panels, it's almost impossible to see the colour of the glass. It's just a kind of very dark bluey grey. The glass is mottled, which would make it impossible to clearly see through even if the lights were on inside. With these qualities in mind, I wanted to come up with a technique that would make the stained glass look realistic and certainly not toy-like. My first idea therefore was just to use photos of the real thing in the model. I started with a photograph of the real windows in Lightroom on my iPad. Taken from below, the windows are not square on. I used the guided geometry tool to quickly fix this. By dragging lines along what should be straight, I am left with a perfectly rectangular window that I can use for the model. I repeat this on the arched windows too. I want the windows to be realistic, but also to hint at a little bit of colour. I used the light and colour tools in Lightroom to enhance the colour and contrast a little. These will be tiny once printed, so a bit of extra definition should make them stand out a little. I scaled the photo to the correct size for the building in Inkscape and printed it out several times. And that looks good for a start. I wanted the glazing to be a bit reflective, but my paper is matte. Instead of buying some gloss paper, I decided to try gloss varnish. I applied this with a brush. On each of the 4 tests I applied the varnish in thicker and thicker layers. The one on the left is particularly globulous. The one with 2 thin coats of varnish looked best. I cut this out and using the tiniest dot of PVA, glued it to the model. I glued it on upside down, but other than that, this level of sheen looks good. I think this looks promising. I wondered if I could hint at the mottled effect of the glass by adding varnish in dots. I blobbed the varnish on with the brush and left it to dry. In place, the window didn't look too much like glass, especially since there were matte patches showing through the blobs. I tried a more subtle one with smaller blobs and a final overcoat of varnish, but this looked just too glossy and wobbly, and I didn't use it. I got a lot of suggestions from people saying that acetate is the way to go with stained glass. As a test, I created some brightly coloured windows using simple shapes in Inkscape. Despite using intense colours, they printed out really lightly, but I guess that this is the nature of printing to acetate. They did look a lot darker once on the model. First impressions were that the acetate window looked flat and a little bit lifeless. But although the camera doesn't pick this up, somehow the depth of colour was much more impressive than the photo. I'd read suggestions about what to put behind the acetate, if anything. So I tried white paper. Too bright, unrealistic. Black paper. Too dark, no sense of colour or texture. Tin foil or a mirror. Too weird. I don't think a mirror would work well here either. I tried printing the photo to acetate. The crispness and contrast of the photo paper was simply not there on the acetate. When lit from behind, it looked washed out and a little bit lacklustre. The first acetate window looked deeply coloured and more 3D in real life, but the photo-based window looked much better on camera. I eventually decided that the photo one would be more fitting for Chandwell and the video's audience, so I settled on that. I took off all of the test pieces, and despite using a tiny amount of glue, they were really well stuck down. I tried several different colour treatments until I was happy. I tried lighter, darker, higher contrast, lower contrast, more saturation, less saturation. I tried different printer driver settings and different amounts of varnish. 23 different variants. It came down to these 2, and eventually I chose this one. It looks dark enough to be realistic, but colourful enough to be interpreted as stained glass from a normal viewing distance. All I needed to do now was add it to the building. I printed 2 components, one for the arches and one for the stairwell. I used a wide brush to apply the varnish. The paper crinkled a bit here, and I considered printing it again and sticking it to card, but the crinkles fell out as the varnish dried. I applied very thin beads of PVA to the printed component, and then dropped the building onto it. I think this is going to look great. Some glue splurged out of the edges, but this was removed with a brush. I used PVA to join the two sections together. Sometimes I use a glue stick for this, but I do prefer PVA from the applicator. You don't get lumps building up in the edges of the window openings, and there's no chance of ripping the tiny, delicate stone mullions. I use thin glue that applies easily, and then just drop the top layer onto the bottom one. Smooth it down, and there we are, a 1mm thick building face. This is starting to look good. I thought I was finished, but my friend Tim asked me what it would look like with lighting behind. Don't be daft, I thought. It's photo paper, not acetate. But to humour him, I gave it a try. I was taken aback by how good this looks. With just a mobile phone torch behind, the windows glow with a beautiful glassy sheen. This looks much better than I imagined. I had no intention of lighting this building. But now I'm wondering, I now have a 2mm thick component with all of the other windows in place. I'm moving around the side next. I'm going to be making a forced perspective alleyway based on one I photographed recently in Dewsbury. Here's a look at the last time I used forced perspective. So until the alleyway episode, thank you for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.